The loneliest place in the world isn't an empty house. It's saving a seat for someone who never comes home. The candle had burned down to a puddle of wax by the time I finally stopped checking my phone. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Manhattan penthouse, rain streaked across the glass in silver lines, blurring the city lights into soft smears of gold and white. The view was breathtaking. Everyone said so. But that night all I could see was the empty chair across from me. I glanced at the clock again. 9:47 p.m. Our anniversary dinner reservation had been at 7. The restaurant had called twice. I'd lied both times. "He's running late," I told them. The truth was simpler. Ethan Blackwell wasn't coming. I should have been used to it by now. My husband was the CEO of Blackwell Capital. Billion-dollar acquisitions. Endless meetings. Flights between New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Important people needing important things. His schedule ruled our lives. Still, tonight hurt more than usual. Maybe because it was our second wedding anniversary. Maybe because I'd spent an hour choosing a dress he would probably never see. Or maybe because some foolish part of me kept hoping he would finally look at me the way husbands were supposed to look at their wives. I picked up my wine glass and stared at the reflection staring back from the dark window. 29 years old. Married. Successful. Living in a luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park. From the outside my life looked perfect. But perfection could be surprisingly cold. My phone remained silent. No text. No call. Nothing. The silence felt louder than the rain. I stood and walked toward the dining table. 2 untouched plates sat beneath a soft pool of candlelight. The food had gone cold over an hour ago. Just like my mood. Ethan wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. He was polite. Respectful. Generous. Every birthday remembered. Every bill paid before it arrived. Every problem quietly solved before I even knew it existed. Yet somehow, despite sharing the same home for 2 years, I still felt like a guest in his life. My phone suddenly vibrated against the marble countertop. My heart jumped before I could stop it. Ethan. It had to be Ethan. I grabbed it immediately. But the name on the screen wasn't Ethan Blackwell. It was Ryan Brooks. For a second I simply stared. I hadn't seen that name in almost 4 years. The room seemed smaller somehow. The rain louder. The memories sharper. Ryan. My first love. The man I thought I would marry before life took us in different directions. The call stopped before I could answer. A second later a text appeared. "Sophia. I know it's been a long time. I wasn't sure you'd still have this number. But I'm in New York for a medical conference. I'd really like to see you." I read it twice. Then 3 times. My pulse quickened in a way that surprised me. Not because I still loved Ryan. I didn't. At least I didn't think I did. But there was something unsettling about hearing from a person who once knew every version of you. Before success. Before marriage. Before loneliness learned how to disguise itself as stability. Another text appeared. "Only if you want to. No pressure." I looked across the room at the empty chair Ethan had left waiting. Then at the message glowing softly in my hand. Somewhere below, a siren echoed through the city. The rain continued falling. And for the first time all night I wasn't thinking about my husband. I was thinking about the man who had just stepped back into my life. I almost ignored the message. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Married women did not meet old boyfriends for coffee after years of silence. Married women especially did not think about those messages while lying awake at 2 in the morning beside a husband who never seemed to sleep. But life was rarely as simple as the rules people created for it. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and the familiar hum of Manhattan traffic drifting 20 floors below. Ethan had already left. His side of the bed was perfectly made. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the room, clean and expensive and distant. On the nightstand sat a small velvet box. My stomach tightened. Inside was a diamond bracelet. Elegant. Beautiful. Probably worth more than my first car. There was no note. No epalegi. No mention of our anniversary. Just the gift. I stared at it for several seconds before closing the lid. Somehow the bracelet made me feel worse. By noon I was sitting inside a small cafe near Bryant Park, turning a paper coffee cup between my hands. I had almost canceled 3 times. Then the bell above the door chimed. I looked up. Ryan Brooks stepped inside. For a moment, for years disappeared. He looked older, of course. More confident. His dark blonde hair was shorter. There were faint lines around his eyes now. But his smile was exactly the same. Warm. Familiar. Easy. The kind of smile that made people feel welcome. Sophia. My name sounded strange coming from him after so long. I stood and hugged him briefly. Friendly. Polite. Yet memories stirred anyway. You look exactly the same, he said. I laughed immediately. That is objectively false. Fine. Better than before. The compliment was so effortless that I nearly forgot how much I used to enjoy talking to him. We sat near the window while people hurried through the city outside. At first the conversation stayed safe. Work. Family. Life updates. Ryan was now a successful surgeon in Boston. He traveled frequently. He spoke about his patients with genuine passion. I told him about my interior design projects. The conversation flowed naturally, like no time had passed at all. That was what surprised me most. Not attraction. Not romance. Comfort. The kind of comfort I had not realized I was missing. At one point Ryan smiled and shook his head. You still do that. Do what? Twist your coffee cup when you are nervous. I froze slightly. He noticed. A tiny detail. Something Ethan had probably never seen. Ryan laughed softly. I used to know every expression on your face. The words should have felt sweet. Instead they left an ache somewhere deep inside me. Because once upon a time it had been true. Nearly 2 hours passed before either of us noticed. As we stepped outside, a cold breeze swept through the avenue. Ryan glanced at his watch. I have a dinner event tonight, but maybe we could catch up again before I leave? I hesitated. Not because I wanted to say yes. Not because I wanted to say no. Because I was suddenly aware of how complicated the answer felt. Then Ryan's eyes shifted past me. His expression changed slightly. Curious. Cautious. I turned. Across the street, parked beside the curb, sat a black town car I recognized instantly. The driver stood beside the rear door. And through the tinted window, I caught a brief glimpse of Ethan Blackwell watching us. There was something unsettling about being watched by your own husband. Not because Ethan looked angry. He did not. Not because he looked jealous. Ethan Blackwell was far too controlled for that. It was the fact that I could not read him at all. The tinted window rolled up before I could see more than a brief outline of his face. Seconds later, the driver opened the rear door. Ryan glanced between me and the car. Friend, he asked lightly. I almost laughed. Something like that. My phone vibrated in my purse. I already knew who it was before I checked. Ethan. Just 3 words. Get in. Now. I stared at the screen. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Yes. The lie came automatically. Just work stuff. Ryan did not seem convinced, but he was polite enough not to push. I should head out anyway. It was good seeing you, Sophia. You too. He smiled again. Warm. Familiar. Then he walked toward the opposite corner and disappeared into the flow of afternoon pedestrians. For a moment I considered pretending I had not seen Ethan's message. Then another text appeared. The car is waiting. No greeting. No explanation. No mention of our anniversary. Typical. I crossed the street and slid into the back seat. Ethan sat beside the window wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A tablet rested on his lap. His attention appeared focused on the screen. The city reflected across the glass behind him. Hello to you too, I said. Hello, Sophia. His eyes never left the tablet. The driver pulled away from the curb. Silence settled between us. Familiar. Heavy. I looked out the window. 5 blocks passed before Ethan finally spoke. How is Ryan Brooks? I turned immediately. You know his last name? Ethan looked up at last. Calm. Expressionless. You were together for several years. My stomach tightened. How do you know that? You told me. No, I did not. For the first time, Ethan hesitated. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. Then he returned his attention to the screen. Perhaps I read it somewhere. That answer made even less sense. I studied his profile. The strong jaw. The controlled posture. Everything about Ethan seemed designed to reveal nothing. Yet something felt different today. The air inside the car felt tighter somehow. "Were you watching us?" I asked quietly. "No." The answer came too quickly. I almost smiled. "Really?" I was leaving a meeting. Across the street from my cafe? Ethan closed the tablet. Finally. Fully. His blue eyes settled on mine. "Did you enjoy seeing him?" Such a simple question. Yet I could not remember the last time Ethan had asked anything about my feelings. "Yes," I admitted. "It was nice catching up." Something flickered across his face. "Gone almost instantly." "I see." The conversation ended there. Or at least Ethan tried to end it. But for the rest of the drive, he remained unusually quiet. More than usual. That evening I expected him to disappear into his office like always. Instead, when I came downstairs after changing clothes, I found him sitting in the living room, waiting. A file rested on the coffee table. He was not working, not reading, just sitting there. "Do you need something?" I asked. Ethan looked up from his thoughts. "Would you like to have dinner?" I actually checked the room behind me to make sure he was talking to me. "Dinner?" "Yes." "With you." One corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. That is generally how dinner works. I stared at him, completely stunned. 2 years. 2 years of canceled meals, rushed breakfasts and endless meetings. And now suddenly he wanted dinner. Ethan stood and picked up his jacket. "There is a restaurant you like near 5th Avenue. My heartbeat quickened. Not because of romance. Because this was strange. Very strange. As we walked toward the elevator, my phone vibrated again. A message from Ryan. "I forgot how easy it is to talk to you. Let me know if you would like coffee again before I leave New York." I froze. Then I glanced toward Ethan. He stood beside the elevator doors, waiting. Calm. Patient. But something told me if he knew what was on my screen, this quiet evening might not stay quiet for very long. Sometimes the smallest changes are the hardest to ignore. I slipped my phone back into my purse before Ethan could see the message. Not because I was hiding anything. At least that was what I told myself. Yet guilt followed me all the way to the restaurant. The evening air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement as our car moved through Manhattan traffic. Neon reflections slid across the windows. Ethan sat beside me, unusually quiet. Again, the restaurant was one of my favorites. A small place tucked between luxury boutiques and historic brownstones. I had mentioned it exactly once nearly a year ago. The realization stopped me halfway to the entrance. Ethan remembered. The hostess greeted him by name and immediately led us toward a private table near the back. Soft lighting. Fresh flowers. A view of the city. Everything was perfect. Almost too perfect. "You have been here before?" I asked as we sat down. "A few times." "Without me?" Ethan glanced up from the menu. "Business dinners." That made sense. Everything in Ethan's life somehow involved business. Yet tonight felt different. The waiter arrived. Ethan ordered my favorite wine before I could speak. My eyebrows lifted. "You remember?" "Of course." He said it so casually that I almost missed it. Of course. As if remembering details about me was the most natural thing in the world. The conversation moved slowly at first. Work. Projects. Ordinary topics. Then something strange happened. Ethan started asking questions. Real questions. About my current design project. About a client meeting I had mentioned weeks ago. About a charity event I plan to attend next month. It felt like talking to a completely different man. More than once I found myself staring at him in confusion. "What?" he finally asked. "Nothing." That was clearly not nothing. I laughed softly. "You are just being unusually talkative tonight." His expression shifted. Almost embarrassed. "I suppose that is possible." I nearly dropped my fork. Ethan. Blackwell admitting fault might have qualified as a historic event. The evening continued. The tension that usually existed between us slowly faded. For the first time in months, maybe years, dinner felt easy. Comfortable. Then my phone lit up on the table. "Ryan." Just a message preview. Nothing more. But I saw Ethan notice it immediately. His eyes dropped to the screen. Then returned to his water glass. No reaction. No comment. Yet something changed. The warmth vanished. Not completely. Just enough for me to feel it. You can answer if you need to, he said. It is not important. Ethan nodded once. Too quickly. The silence returned. Not hostile. Not angry. Just careful. As if we had both stepped onto thin ice without realizing it. When dinner ended, we walked outside beneath a sky filled with low clouds and scattered city lights. A cool breeze lifted my hair. Across the street, a violinist played beneath a storefront awning. The melody drifted through the night. Ethan stopped walking. I turned toward him. What is it? For several seconds he simply looked at me. The traffic noise faded into the background. The city seemed to disappear. Then he asked a question so unexpected it stole my breath. Are you happy, Sophia? My heart skipped. In 2 years of marriage, Ethan had never asked me that before. Not once. I opened my mouth, closed it again, because the truth was far more complicated than either of us was ready to hear. The question followed me all the way home. Are you happy, Sophia? Sounded simple. Most people would have answered immediately. Yes. No. Maybe. But standing there beneath the glow of Manhattan streetlights with Ethan watching me, I realized I did not know. Not anymore. Why are you asking? I said quietly. Ethan slipped one hand into his coat pocket. His expression remained unreadable. I was curious. I almost laughed. Curious. The word felt foreign coming from him. Ethan Blackwell did not get curious. He analyzed. He planned. He executed. Curiosity belonged to other people. That is a dangerous question for a marriage, I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps. The driver pulled the car around a moment later, ending the conversation before either of us could say anything more. Yet the silence inside the penthouse that night felt different. Less comfortable. More aware. As if something had shifted beneath the surface and neither of us knew what would happen next. The following morning I woke to sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. For once Ethan was still home. He stood in the kitchen wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Coffee steamed beside him. The sight stopped me cold. In 2 years I could count on one hand the number of mornings we had shared. You are not at the office? I asked. Ethan glanced up from his laptop. Later. Later. Is there an echo in the apartment? I smiled despite myself. That almost sounded like humor. Almost. My phone vibrated before I could answer. Ryan. A message. I am speaking at Columbia Medical Center this afternoon. Afterwards I am free. Would you like to walk through Central Park? I stared at the screen, then quickly turned it over. Too late. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. Ryan again? He asked. The question sounded casual. Too casual. Yes. He nodded once and returned to his laptop. Conversation over. Or so I thought. 5 minutes later he spoke again. You should go. I looked up. What? Central Park. You should go. That surprised me. You mean that? Why would I say it otherwise? Because husbands generally did not encourage their wives to spend time with former boyfriends. But I kept that thought to myself. The afternoon arrived bright and unusually warm for early spring. Central Park buzzed with runners, tourists, dog walkers, and musicians scattered along winding pathways. Ryan waited near Bethesda Terrace holding 2 iced coffees. I remembered your order, he said with a grin. He had. Exactly. Even the amount of cream. We walked for nearly 2 hours. Talking. Laughing. Remembering old stories from college. Felt easy. Effortless. The kind of connection that only existed when someone had known you before life became complicated. At one point we stopped beside the lake. Sunlight danced across the water. Ryan leaned against the railing and looked at me carefully. Can I ask you something? My stomach tightened immediately. That depends. Are you happy? I froze. The exact same question. Less than 24 hours apart. Different man. Same words. Ryan smiled sadly. That answer tells me everything. The breeze moved through the trees above us. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Ryan took a slow breath. Sophia, when I left 4 years ago, it was the biggest mistake of my life. My heart skipped. Not from excitement. From uncertainty. because suddenly I knew exactly where this conversation was heading. And for the first time since we met again, I was not sure I wanted to hear it. The moment those words left Ryan's mouth, the world seemed to slow down. Around us, people continued walking through the park. A little girl chased pigeons near the fountain. A street musician played a saxophone somewhere in the distance. Life moved forward as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. At least for me. Ryan looked away briefly before returning his gaze to mine. I did not plan to say that today, he admitted. I told myself I would just see you catch up and leave New York without making things complicated. I swallowed hard. Ryan. He raised a hand gently. You do not have to say anything. I am not asking you to. His honesty somehow made it worse. If he had pressured me, if he had pushed too hard, it would have been easier to dismiss him. But Ryan had always been thoughtful. That was part of the reason I had fallen in love with him years ago. I am married, I said quietly. His expression softened. I know. Then why now? Ryan released a slow breath. Because I saw you yesterday and realized I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I stayed. The words settled heavily between us. I looked toward the water. Sunlight reflected across the lake in bright flashes. 4 years ago, I had imagined a future with Ryan. Then life had taken us in different directions. Careers, distance, timing. None of it had felt dramatic at the time. Just unfortunate. Yet standing there now, I could not help wondering about the version of my life that never happened. Ryan seemed to sense my thoughts. You deserve someone who makes you feel chosen every day, Sophia. My chest tightened. Chosen. Such a simple word. Yet I could not remember the last time I had felt it. Before I could respond, Ryan's phone buzzed. He glanced down and smiled faintly. That is my hospital administrator. Apparently surgeons are not allowed personal lives. I laughed despite the tension. I am shocked. I know. It is devastating. For a few minutes the conversation shifted back to safer topics. Work. Travel. Mutual friends from college. Eventually we reached the park entrance where our paths would separate. The afternoon sun had started sinking lower between the buildings. Ryan looked at me for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and gave me a brief hug. Warm. Familiar. Innocent. Yet emotionally complicated all the same. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You too. He smiled one last time before walking away into the crowd. I watched until he disappeared completely. Then I headed home. The penthouse was unusually quiet when I arrived. No television. No phone calls. No sound of Ethan moving through his office. I set my purse down and noticed a light coming from the study. The door stood partially open. Ethan sat behind his desk staring at a file. Or at least pretending to. Because the moment I stepped closer, he looked up immediately. As though he had been listening for the elevator all along. You are home early, I said. So are you. Something in his voice made me pause. He removed his glasses and set them carefully on the desk. His attention remained fixed on me. Focused. Intense. Different. How was Central Park? He asked. The question sounded casual. But something underneath it was not. For a second I considered giving a simple answer. Then I noticed the folder lying open beside him. My stomach dropped. Across the top page in bold letters was a familiar name. Ryan Brooks. The room suddenly felt smaller. My eyes locked on the name printed across the file. Ryan Brooks. There was no mistaking it. The letters were clear even from where I stood. Ethan noticed where I was looking and quietly closed the folder. Too late. Why do you have a file on Ryan? I asked. My voice sounded calmer. Then I felt. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I like to be informed. About my former boyfriend? Silence. That silence told me more than any answer could have. I stepped farther into the study. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows. Thousands of lights stretched across Manhattan. Yet all I could focus on was the man sitting in front of me. The man I had been married to for 2 years. The man who suddenly felt like a stranger. Ethan. He looked up. What? What is happening? For the first time he seemed unable to answer immediately. That alone unsettled me. Ethan always had answers. Always. Nothing is happening. That is not true. My words came faster now. You are asking questions you never asked before. You suddenly have time for dinners. You know things about Ryan you should not know. And now I find a file with his name on your desk. Ethan stood slowly. His expression remained controlled, but tension radiated from him. You are overthinking this. I laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. No. I think I have spent 2 years not thinking enough. The words hung between us. Sharp. Honest. Necessary. Ethan looked away first. That surprised me more than anything. Did he tell you he still loves you? The question hit me so hard I forgot to breathe. My heart pounded. How do you know that? Ethan's jaw tightened. There it was again. That tiny crack in the armor. That glimpse of something emotional beneath all the control. Because men do not look at women, they have forgotten the way he looks at you. I stared at him. Ryan's feelings are not the issue. They become the issue when they involve my wife. The room fell silent. My wife. Ethan had said those words countless times before. Yet tonight they sounded different. Possessive. Personal. Real. Then tell me what the issue is, I whispered. Ethan walked toward the window. His reflection appeared against the glass. Powerful CEO. Billionaire. The man who intimidated boardrooms without raising his voice. Yet somehow he looked exhausted. The issue, he said quietly, is that I have spent years pretending something did not matter. I frowned. What are you talking about? He turned around. Slowly. Deliberately. His eyes found mine. And suddenly all the walls were gone. You. One word. Just one. Yet it changed everything. My pulse thundered in my ears. Ethan. No. Let me finish. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the strain underneath. Years of restraint cracking apart. Do you know why I remember your favorite restaurant? He asked. Do you know why I know how you take your coffee? Why I know the names of your clients? Why I know when you are pretending to smile? I could not answer. Because I did not know. Not really. Ethan took another step closer. Because I have been paying attention for a very long time. My chest tightened. How long? For a second he simply looked at me. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile he showed investors. Not the controlled smile he used in public. This one carried sadness, regret, vulnerability. 4 years. The number hit me like a wave. 4 years. A full year before our wedding. Before our engagement. Before any of it. That is impossible. It is not. Ethan. I loved you before you ever became my wife, Sophia. The world seemed to stop moving. The traffic outside disappeared. The city disappeared. Everything disappeared except those words. 4 years. He had loved me for 4 years. And suddenly every strange thing about the last week felt far less important than one impossible question. If that was true, why had he never told me? I wish I could say I answered immediately. That I knew exactly what to do the moment Ethan confessed. But the truth was far messier than that. I stood frozen in the middle of the study while his words echoed through my head. 4 years. 4 years. 4 years. Did not make sense. Nothing about it made sense. You loved me. I finally whispered. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Before we were even together? Yes. I stared at him, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, some missing detail that would make everything logical again. But there was nothing, only sincerity, raw and unguarded in a way I had never seen before. Then why? I asked. Why would you hide that? Ethan laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because some truths hurt when spoken aloud, because loving someone does not mean they owe you anything in return. The answer caught me completely off guard. He walked back toward the desk and opened a drawer. For a moment I thought the conversation was over. Instead, he pulled out a thin folder and placed it carefully in front of me. What is this? I asked. Open it. My hands felt strangely unsteady. Inside were photographs, event programs, newspaper clippings, design competition announcements. First they seemed random. Then I noticed something. Every item connected back to me. My college graduation. My first interior design award. A charity fundraiser from years ago. My first major project featured in a local magazine. I looked up slowly. Ethan. Keep going. I turned another page. There were handwritten notes. Dates. Locations. Small observations. Sophia won first place. Sophia opened her own design firm. Sophia spoke at the community center. Sophia looked happy today. My chest tightened. You kept all of this. His eyes never left mine. I kept everything. Suddenly memories began resurfacing. Small moments I had forgotten years ago. Tiny events that never seemed important. The anonymous donor who funded a scholarship during my final year of school. The business contact who unexpectedly introduced me to my biggest client. The investor who quietly backed my first design expansion when the bank refused. At the time, each event had felt like luck. Random kindness. Coincidence. No. Iwisparat. That was you. Ethan looked away briefly. That alone was enough of an answer. I sank into the chair beside his desk. My pulse raced. Why would you do all of that? His smile carried a sadness that made my heart ache. Because I wanted your life to be easier. I stared at him, speechless. For years I had believed Ethan was emotionally distant because he did not care enough. Yet every page in front of me told a different story. He had been there all along. Quietly. Invisibly. Loving me in ways I never noticed. I thought you forgot our anniversary, I said softly. Ethan's expression changed immediately. I did not forget. He opened another drawer and removed a small envelope. Inside were 2 plane tickets. Aspen. Weekend reservations. Spa appointments. Dinner reservations. Everything planned weeks in advance. I was moving meetings so I could surprise you. My throat tightened painfully. Then why did you not tell me? Ethan released a long breath. Because every time I tried, I convinced myself there would be a better moment. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Emotional. Honest. Then I noticed one final photograph tucked inside the folder. It showed a charity gala from 4 years ago. Hundreds of people filled the ballroom. But someone had circled a single woman in red. Me. My heart stopped. Because suddenly I realized exactly when Ethan had first seen me. And suddenly I wanted to know the entire story. The photograph trembled slightly between my fingers. 4 years ago. 4 years before this moment. 4 years before I ever understood what Ethan Blackwell felt when he looked at me. I lifted my eyes from the image and found him watching me quietly from across the desk. The city lights reflected in the windows behind him, turning the glass into a sea of gold and silver. Tell me, I whispered. Ethan looked down at the photograph. A faint smile touched his face. You were standing near the stage arguing with the event coordinator. I blinked. That is what you remember? You were defending a volunteer they were blaming for a mistake she did not make. My breath caught. I vaguely remembered the event. Barely. Yet Ethan remembered every detail. Everyone else ignored her, he continued. You did not. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable this time. Different. Softer. That was the moment? I asked. Ethan nodded. That was the moment. For years I had believed love arrived dramatically. Fireworks. Fate. Grand declarations. But looking at him now, I realized sometimes love arrived quietly. In a crowded ballroom. In a forgotten conversation. In a moment so small that only one person noticed it mattered. My eyes drifted back to the folder. Every page told the same story. Not obsession. Not control. Care. Consistent. Patient. Unseen care. Suddenly I understood why the last few weeks felt so different. Ethan had not changed. He had simply stopped hiding. A laugh escaped me unexpectedly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What is funny? I shook my head. I spent 2 years believing you did not love me. Something vulnerable crossed his expression. I know. Those 2 words hurt more than they should have. Because he knew. He knew exactly how lonely I had felt. Exactly how many nights I sat at empty tables wondering if I mattered. And somehow he had felt lonely too. We had been standing on opposite sides of the same wall. Neither of us knowing how to cross it. My phone vibrated softly on the desk. Ryan. Another message. For a moment neither of us moved. Then I picked up the phone and looked at the screen. A simple goodbye. He was leaving New York in the morning. He wished me happiness. Nothing more. Nothing less. I smiled sadly and set the phone down. Ethan did not ask what the message said. He simply waited. The way he always waited, giving me space to choose. And suddenly the answer felt obvious. Not because Ryan was a bad man. He was not. He was kind, honest, familiar. But when I imagined my future, I realized something important. Ryan represented the life I once thought I wanted. Ethan was the life that had been quietly loving me all along. I walked around the desk before I could lose my courage. Ethan stood immediately. Concern flashed across his face. Hope followed. Then uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in his life, the powerful CEO looked completely vulnerable. I reached for his hand. His fingers tightened around mine instantly. "You should have told me sooner," I said softly. Ethan laughed under his breath. "I know. You are terrible at this. I know that too." I smiled. A real smile. The first one in what felt like forever. "Good. Then we can learn together." Something bright appeared in his eyes. Relief. Happiness. Love. Unfiltered at last. Outside, Manhattan continued shining beneath the night sky. Traffic moved. People hurried home. Life carried on. But inside that room, everything had changed. Because sometimes the greatest love story is not the one that arrives loudly. It is the one that waits patiently until both hearts are finally ready to hear it.